was short, but we want to continue, and we're going to try to finish before lunch, because we're not going to feed you today, okay? So, I mean, you can eat all those things downstairs you want, but we don't have any lunch for you today. So I'm really happy to present Bob McLaughlin. He's going to come and share 30-year more of law enforcement. He's going to tell you more, fire department. He's done about all, okay? But glad to have you with us today. So welcome, Bob.
Thank you. I appreciate y'all inviting me here this morning. As Ed mentioned earlier, I recently retired from North Carolina Central University as emergency management coordinator. I spent 6.5 years there. Prior to that, I spent 28 years with Forsyth County EMS, Durham Fire, and Durham PD. Retired in 2011 in March. Spent 3 months blissfully retired. I was the assistant commander in training when I retired from Durham as a lieutenant, and was blissfully retired for 3 months, and then went to work at NCCU. Made it through my 6.5 years there, and now I'm blissfully retired again. And then Ed came to me a week before I retired from Central, called me on the phone and said, aren't you still retiring next week? I said, yeah, because I got a proposal for you. And my wife was all over that. So she can't retire yet, and I've retired twice, so she's lucky. You're not retired. As mentioned earlier, I started in Forsyth County in 1982. 19-year-old, wet behind the ears. Thought I knew everything. Worked my way up to paramedic. 1987, I came to Durham. I married a girl from Orange County. First wife, police officer requirement, you had 2 wives. So, I'm just saying.
One at a time, however.
One at a time, yeah. I am Baptist, I'm not sure. So, but the thing is, I married a young lady from Orange County, so her dad offered us some land. So I applied to Durham, got hired at Durham Fire Department in 87. Went to work with Gary Pascal. I saw Gary a minute ago. There he is. Gary was Durham Fire. He was actually the driver on my truck when I was a firefighter on the back engine 1. Spent 9.5 years in Durham Fire. My last 3.5 were in the fire marshal's office, and that's where I went to BLET and got sworn. I decided I liked arresting people more than I did fighting fire, so I switched over to the PD in 97 and retired in 2011. Worked my way up through the police department, started as a patrol officer, became a detective, also started the police department's counterterrorism unit, the biochemical emergency response team, which works in conjunction with the Durham Sheriff's Office bomb squad. We did response to IEDs, as well as response to any weapon of mass destruction. We really ramped it. We started in 99. We were preparing for Y2K. It super ramped up, of course, after 9/11. And then we went full time. I managed to get promoted to corporal above my skill level. And then went back out to the street. Still stayed on the team part-time until I made sergeant, way above my skill level. And then spent my time as a sergeant on patrol, as well as a CID sergeant. I was in charge of a violent crimes unit, and then got promoted to lieutenant. Spent 2.5 years as a watch commander, which was the best job in the Durham Police Department, where I was in charge of the entire shift of D squad. We worked 12-hour shifts, and that was, to me, my favorite job. I was asked by the captain of training to come work with him, because his lieutenant was getting promoted to captain. So I went to training my last 2 years, and that's where I spent my last 2 years before I left. At Central, I got hired to do emergency management and training. I ended up becoming the health and safety manager. So I was responsible not only for emergency operations planning, which is something I want to talk to you about what we do, but I also was responsible for all the fire alarm, fire suppression systems, hazardous materials, as well as just your everyday OSHA stuff on campus. I had 2 industrial hygienists that worked with me, and they were the brains. I was just the one doing the paperwork. They had we did a lot of work on campus. We had 66 buildings on campus, as well as facilities in Kannapolis and different satellite facilities here in Durham that the university rents and we have personnel at. So we had a lot to do, and we managed to keep things pretty safe. One of the things I was real proud of at the police department side is when I first got there, the guys, the males and the guys and the girls, we were They were a good department, but they had not done much tactical training and not moved forward as far as preparing for active shooter and things like that. One of the things I was able to introduce was long guns to the officers on campus. We started out with shotguns and ended up with M4 rifles. I started a patrol rifle team, and basically these guys are now prepared to become SWAT operators. We're moving them towards SWAT training. Unfortunately, I retired, so I'm not going to get to see that myself, but that's their next step. But basically, 1 month after we deployed the rifles on campus, we had an active shooter situation on campus where our officers had to engage a suspect, and we came out on top. He did not. And, you know, that was my biggest achievement as a trainer. And Gary teaches too, so he knows what I'm talking about. My biggest achievement as an instructor was the night of the shooting, at about 3 in the morning, the officer that was engaged, that engaged the suspect first in the gunfight, told me, he said, "I heard you, Bonsai." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "When the other officer yelled gun," because the guy was pulling a sawed-off shotgun out of his sweatpants, he said, "I heard you screaming at me where I've been yelling at him at the range, shoot and move, and maybe a few expletives. But I was yelling at him because I didn't want them standing there and being a target." And that's exactly what he did. And when he fired rounds, he was moving laterally, and the bad guy fired right where he'd been standing but missed. And he said, "You saved my life tonight." And, you know, as an instructor, I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. That this officer told me, "What you showed me kept me alive." And that's what this all goes to when we're talking about preparing. No matter how deeply involved in security your church wants to get, that's fine. If you don't want to do a whole lot, you just want to lock down and protect yourselves and wait for the cavalry to come, that's fine. But you've got to have some kind of plan. You practice it. We all grew up going to elementary school, doing fire drills. Everybody knew what we had to do. Those of you that are older like I am, I actually remember in the 60s doing, for a couple of years, when I was in kindergarten, doing nuclear bomb drills and all that stuff. We don't do that anymore, obviously, but we still do tornado drills. We still do fire drills monthly. Those are things that schools drum in your head. Schools now are required to do active shooter drills. We had a high school on campus, one part of Durham Public Schools. We had an early college on campus, and we were required, and we did 2 active shooter drills every semester, or each semester, each school year, with the school to help them prepare for going on lockdown. You have to be able to do those kind of things to know what to do. We talked about somebody accidentally or intentionally activating the barricade system. It's no different than if a child activates a firearm, they're in trouble. If they pull it, they're in trouble for it. There's consequences. It's training. You got to teach them. You got to train your staff. You got to teach the people in church. I go to Summit Church now. I used to go to Clement Church in Hurdle Mills. And 10 years ago, I started a security safety team, medical team at Clement, which they carry on today, where we had an RN and an EMT on the medical side, and we had 2 security and 1 law enforcement officer, myself, or a trooper sergeant who also went to church there, as security during services on Sunday. The biggest thing we did is by implementing a policy, because there was only our shift schedules, there was only one of us that was law enforcement there at a time. I went ahead as an active shooter instructor and trained my concealed carry holders in active shooter response. They went through the same training that a police officer goes through and a sheriff's deputy goes through, and they had to do their annual retraining, just like they had to do CPR training and AED training. I ran them through all the training that they would have to do because I didn't want one of them shooting me in the back if I was going to respond to an active shooter, and I didn't want to accidentally shoot them because they got in my way. So if they knew how I was going to respond, then we were all safer. I had it set up with a pastor that if he saw me jump up, he would tell everybody to get out, just to get below the pews. Most pews are pretty sturdy. That way, for me and any of my security team that had to respond, us and the bad guys are the only ones standing up. And then that gives me a clear field of fire to be able to engage a suspect and stop the shooting. That's the kind of things you have to think about if you're going to do that. If you're not going to do that, if you're just going to lock down, you're just going to lock down. That's where we talk about the Alice and the run, hide, fight training that we do, where you run if you can, you hide if you can't, you barricade, and if a bad guy's in there, you fight with everything you've got because it's life or death. And that's what you do. You use whatever available weapon you have. It may be your big Bible you're holding. But whatever you have to protect yourself, protect your family, protect your kids, protect your fellow parishioners, that's what you do. To stop it. Are you going to get hurt? Probably. But your chances of survival are much better if you resist than if you lay there and get shot like a sheep. And that's what we're trying to prepare for, is the worst case scenario. And we will also want to prepare you for all hazards. We're not just talking about active shooter. We're talking about tornadoes. We're talking about fires. We're talking about explosions. There have been incidences overseas. Obviously, they just had a suicide bomber in a mosque go in. They had a Coptic church in Egypt. They just had an active shooter, an explosion there. Those things that happen overseas happen here. When I was on the unit for the Durham PD, one of the apartments where one of the suspects from 9/11 used to live in Greensboro, in his apartment, they found an empty suicide bomber vest when the FBI investigated, after the fact, okay, because we were playing catch-up after 9/11. But when they went back and hidden in the closet of the apartment he had lived in, now he'd been moved out a while. The apartment he had lived in, there was a suicide like they had overseas in the Middle East, was in his closet. Okay, so these kind of things you don't always hear about, but just because you don't hear about it doesn't mean it's not happening or it could happen. And that's where we come in as far as trying to prepare you for that worst case scenario, or for any scenario. We heard a lot of talk about medical. Medical is probably what's going to happen. I'm not going to let people get sick. You have older parishioners. Right after we started our team, one of our music minister, his father had a heart attack right after services. He was probably having them during services. He just didn't let anybody know. But then right after we noticed he wasn't feeling good, and our medical team got with him. We call it fire department EMS, and he was transported. He was having a heart attack. He survived, and we took good care of him. Those are the things you need to prepare for. So children fall, get hurt. If you have a playground at your church, we had that happen. You have to be prepared for whatever could happen, because at a church, what are we full of? People. And if there's a lot of people around, stuff happens. And that's the thing that you have to be prepared for, is that one of us could get hurt, one of us could slip and fall. We just had the snow and the ice. If you don't cancel services, somebody falls, you're going to have to deal with that. If you have playgrounds, if you have a lot of children there, kids will run, they don't listen to their parents, we all know that. I got grandkids now that don't listen to me at all. And they're going to do things that they're not supposed to do, and they're going to get hurt. They're going to have to deal with it with a Band-Aid on their boo-boo or whatever. But they could get hurt seriously, and if you don't have a team trained to know what to do, then you could end up causing more problems than helping. We also talk about video surveillance and perimeter. Most churches are on a shoestring budget. I know that. When one of the things we had to do when we started ours at Clement was putting communications in place. We bought the cheap Walmart radios, and I went to on Camden Avenue and bought earpieces to plug in so we could listen during services. And I sat in the front pew, and I could hear the monitor, the security team, as they were doing their rounds. And I was able to keep up with things going on. Same thing with the sergeant from the Highway Patrol when I wasn't there. But that's how they worked. It wasn't great, but it worked. People always knew though if something was going on if I got up and left, or he got up and left in the middle of service. And then they're all, it's church. What's going on? What's going on? Everyone wants to know. They're usually bugging my wife, where'd Bob go? The access control, those are things that, one of the things we have to be concerned about is nurseries. And one of the things we started our team for was because of the fact that there were a lot of parental kidnappings happening. And one of the parishioners, he was concerned about his grandchildren attending, and his daughter was going through a difficult time with her ex-husband. And he was worried about if that guy tried to show up and snatch the kids out of the nursery. So we ended up implementing a protocol for dropping your child off and who picked that child up. So if James dropped his grandchild off, James is the only one who picks that grandchild up. And he had the proper documentation. We had colored wristbands, and the child had the corresponding wristband, and when it matched up, you were able to take your child with you. You know, something very simple as that. I go to Summit now, they have these fancy stickers that they put on the child, and the parent gets a sticker and it matches up, and those are all wonderful things if you have that kind of budget. If you don't have that kind of budget, you can still sign them in, sign them out. There's nothing wrong with that. Just something to be able to keep up with who's got the child. And if you drop that child off, you're the one that picks that child up. Just simple things is what we recommended, and we were able to implement it. Mass notification. On the barricade system, we've worked where we now can, that it has a Bluetooth system that can actually notify either your 911 or it can notify your central, if you have like a security center or whatever, it would notify them that a barricade's been activated and it can be investigated. Those are all things that we, that's all fancy high-tech stuff, but the bottom line is you need to be able to let everybody in your church know immediately something's wrong. It may be as simple as the pastor making an announcement, and he has cues or he has cues that advise him that something's going, that from your security team that something's going on, and he can make that announcement. Or if you have if everybody's in Sunday school like we used to have, we had a PA system throughout all the Sunday schools, and that's how we used to notify you that Sunday school's over, move on to the sanctuary. We use that same thing though for emergency notifications that if something's going on, that they would be able to move toward either locking down or if myself or one of the security team had to respond to something, we would go to it. But you need to be able to do that, know how to shelter in place. Most of us do not have facility emergency operations centers, but you need to have some type of location that where your emergency plans are located and everybody's familiar with. It's on your team, it's on your staff, as well as where your emergency supplies are located, whether it's your AEDs, where your first aid kits, your jump bags, whatever you may have, all those things you need to know where they are so the team that's on duty or whatever can access them and get to them quickly and get to the emergency. As far as your emergency operations plans, one of the things CSP does is we offer emergency operations plan assistance. If you don't have a plan, we will help you write one. If you need assistance in getting one written, that's part of the services we offer. We can help, we can tweak your plan, or we can write your plan from ground zero. We don't reinvent the wheel. We take other plans, other church plans, and we adapt them to what your church does. It's not that hard to do. Again, the most important thing is have a plan. Whatever you do, you've got to have a plan. It's no different than when you go to the movie theater and they first pop up there and screen where the fire exits and all that stuff is in the movie theater. Not only is that required by the fire code, but if you're paying attention to it, you know what's going on. You know how to get out of there if you had to. No different than when you fly in a plane and they give you those instructions by the flight attendants on how everything works, the oxygen mask, the flotation devices, all those things, that if you're not on your phone ignoring them. Those are things that might save your life if you paid attention. My wife always laughs at me when we fly because I'm paying attention. She's like, she flies a lot more than I do, and she's like, I've heard this a million times. I understand that, but I may forget. So I need to know because I can't swim real well. So, and we just went to Hawaii to see our grandchildren, and my son is in the Army, and we were flying over all that Pacific Ocean, and I said, I am not swimming. I'm floating. I'm not going to swim. So. Again, your plan needs to incorporate all hazards. I know the focus of this meeting has been active shooter, and that's a major deal that's in the news, but it needs to be an all hazard plan. You need to be prepared for everything, whether it's weather related, fire related, whatever. It could be something as simple as a boiler problem that or an HVAC problem that you now have no heat. If we were in this church right now and there was no heat, this would be a problem. And we, yeah, you'll know. And so, I live in a 130-year-old farmhouse. I left the house this morning, my kitchen and all that, it was 56. And I was like, this is bad. My wife was upset. So I got a guy coming to do an insulation Monday. So, but you need, and hazardous materials, we probably don't have a whole lot of hazardous materials, but those of us that are in a rural church area, like I was at Clement, we had above ground LP storage tanks. If you have a maintenance crew, you may have gasoline and things like that stored for lawnmowers, all that stuff, or if you hire someone to do it, that's different. But if you have that stuff there and your folks do it themselves, then you need to have a procedure for that. Where is this stuff going to be stored? Is it properly stored? Are they in flammable storage cabinets? Are they in a safe area? All that type of stuff. Those are things we offer as far as on our threat assessments, things you need to prepare for to protect yourselves, as well as anything, cleaning supplies, anything else. Keep them out, because we have kids running around. Keep them away from the kids, keep things locked up so nobody takes a drink of something they shouldn't be drinking. Okay? Okay. We also provide tabletop and full-scale functional exercises. If you're familiar with NCCU here in Durham, back in 2013, I coordinated the largest full-scale exercise at any university in the entire United States. I had 350 participants. I had 32 different agencies, 13 SWAT teams, and I had 18 bad guys, which were Durham County and Durham PD SWAT guys. They were my terrorists that took over 2 residence halls on campus with 45 hostages, with explosives and all that stuff. And we ran an all-day full-scale exercise. Duke University Hospital participated. We borrowed the mass casualty bus from Wake County EMS and transported 10 red tag patients to Duke. They didn't go into the ER, but the doctors and nurses came onto the bus and did an evaluation of triage of how they were going to run in, how the hospital would go on lockdown and diversion and send other patients to other hospitals, while that many patients suddenly influxed into Duke. The county used it as their full-scale exercise, but preceding all that, we had run a tabletop exercise doing all that. The city county right now is in the middle of a FEMA multi-hazard complex coordinated attack exercise. I think it's going to be happening this year. They started 2 years ago on the planning stages of that. It takes time to put this stuff together, but FEMA is actually coming down where they're going to be running that type of exercise, and you'll probably be hearing about it on the news probably in the fall of this year. When we did those exercises, two things we get. You get hands-on doing it. You see people with mutilage, gunshot wounds, and explosion injuries and things like that. So the paramedics and the firefighters have to deal with that. We're having mass casualty transport. We're having law enforcement not only patrol, but the SWAT team, the tactical teams are having to do what they do to be able to secure the scene. Hostage negotiations were going on and all this stuff. What that does is that gives us an opportunity to get some experience without actually shooting people with real bullets and blowing stuff up. The other thing is we do shoot them with sedition rounds, which hurts because it's like paintballs on steroids. But they are, we shoot them out of M4 rifles and 9mm pistols. But what it does is it gives them an opportunity to know that what I just did, if that was a real bullet, I just died. And that's something that officers have to pay attention to because, and even firefighters and medics, because we're doing rescue task forces now where the firefighters and the paramedics are throwing vests on and going in with the teams into the warm zone and doing triage and rescue while there's still active shooting going on in other parts of the building. But we're trying to get people in there because we don't want Columbine to happen again. We don't want that type of situation where we got people bleeding out instead of getting medical care. When the bad guys in another section of the building, we can go ahead and treat the people here because we got the bad guy pinned down over here. So that's the types of stuff that we've improved in our active shooter response from a law enforcement standpoint, from a public safety standpoint, for fire and EMS as well. All of these things that we do, once we complete it, we do what's called a hot wash, where we do what we did right, what we did wrong, what we can do better next time, and then we will develop what's called an after-action report and improvement plan for your church. And then you can actually incorporate that into your plan, tweak your plan, and then we'll test it again. And then what we'll do is we'll see how good it did. If it didn't work, we'll throw it out, because that's what you have to do. I like what the insurance said, train, train, train. It never stops. Just because you take training one time doesn't mean you stop. Gary can tell you, he retired as a captain from Durham Fire Department, but he was still a reserve officer with Durham PD as well as with Orange County Sheriff's Office. Gary had to take his fire training and his police training. I have to do the same thing. I'm retired from Durham PD and from Central as a police officer, but I'm still with the Sheriff's Office in Person County. So I have to take my in-service training every year for that. I have to do my annual fire training and my EMT training to keep my EMT up. And I'm 35 and a half years into this. But I'm still having to train over and over and over again because, number one, I'm not physically capable like I used to be at 28. So I'm not as good as I think I was. But I'm also not, one thing, if you don't practice stuff, all this stuff we do is perishable skills. And if you don't practice it, you lose it. And so you have to continually bring that stuff up. I know my retired Air Force in the back, Mr. Gage, he was talking about, he does tactical training for concealed carry holders. That's extremely important because I teach concealed carry as well. And if you take the basic concealed carry course, that's nothing. It's very easy, and if you do it through Virginia, you just do it online and you get your concealed carry permit. And we reciprocate with Virginia. Well, that's real good. You got a Virginia, and you don't have to be a resident of Virginia to have it. Okay? And that's crazy though, because you got people getting their concealed carry that never shot their gun. And so you got to take training like what he offers, where you can go out and do some tactical training, even if it's just clearing your own house. My wife kids me about my 7-year-old grandson, that I have him clear my house with me. And I said, well, that's a skill he may need someday when he comes home and finds his house broken into. And you know, and all our boys, we got 3 boys and 1 girl. And my girl's more tactical than the boys are, but anyhow, except the guy that's in the army. But it's funny that all these things that we talk about, if you don't practice them, if you don't do them over and over again, you'll lose it. It's just like CPR training, it's fire extinguisher training, all those things. So we want to make sure that you're always working toward, whether you use CSP to do it, whether you use Mr. Gage's training to do it, whether you do it just in-house and just coordinate with your local law enforcement, do it. Train correctly and do it over and over and over again. A lot of sheriff's departments are offering a lot of church safety training with all this going on. If it's free, I'm working with a company and we're trying to drum up business. But I'm telling you, take the training, get whatever training you can get, whether it's free or whether you pay for it. If you can take it, take it. Because there's a lot of people out there that are teaching things. You want to make sure it's vetted though, that it's good, accurate training. And that's why I recommend that if you go with the sheriff's office, they have standards they have to train you to. It's just like me working with the sheriff's department. I have to teach active shooter training. I teach it under the North Carolina Criminal Justice Training and Standards Division, well as the Sheriff Training and Standards Division. I teach what they tell us to teach. I also teach through Alert through Texas State University, which is the FBI recognized active shooter response. So I teach that training as well. So what I teach is federally recognized as well as state recognized. So you want to make sure that whoever you hire is teaching you what is recognized, what is accepted practices from law enforcement, fire, and EMS. Okay, so that's something that's very important when you're looking at, okay, we're going to hire this company to do this training, or we're going to reach out to this group for training. Okay? I think that should pretty much do it. We go one more. That's good.
See if there's a question.
Yeah. So is there any questions about anything that I've mentioned? I know you're going to do a question and answer afterwards, so I think we're going to bring all this up. Does anybody have any questions about anything I may have mentioned? If I confused you on anything?
Okay, we're going to thank you. Thanks a lot. We're going to have Q&A time at the end, and appreciate Glenn. I'm going to ask Glenn to come up. Glenn Gage, some of you know, is a member of First Baptist Hillsborough, and also ex-military, but also he has some things to tell us about carry and conceal. That there've been a lot of questions already brought up. I want to ask you first, before if you have not given us your information, if you could write down your name and your church and an email address. Some of you have asked, can we get some of these, the information that we put up? We're going to try to get that information. I'll be glad to send that to you. So if you'll give us your email, if you don't want it, don't put it down. But if you haven't put this down, if you haven't signed it, just pass those around. There's about 4 or 5 sheets, but if If you already put your name down, don't worry about it, but if you didn't, we'd love to have a record of your attendance, but also be able to share more information and information about upcoming training that might be done as well. So, Glenn, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Marty. A couple of points of clarity first. When I spoke earlier, I was incomplete. I want to assure you that anybody who is threatened, whose life is threatened, can defend themselves with lethal force. They do not have to be a permitted concealed carrier to do that. They only have to be a permitted concealed carrier to defend themselves with a concealed handgun. Other than that, if your life is threatened and you want to defend yourself with lethal force of some other manner, you may do that. North Carolina law covers you. If you act properly, you are exempt from and immune from criminal as well as civil liability. I'll give you an example. Amanda, would you please stand up? Amanda's not a big lady, but if her life was threatened and she wants to take that big speaker and club the big bad guy over the head with it and do that lethally, she's covered by North Carolina law. Okay. Secondly, as far as my tactical training goes, thank you, Bonsai, for elevating me to a level that I haven't attained. I don't teach tactical shoot and move training as Bonsai spoke about. What I do teach is mindset, spiritual and Christian and word-based mindset and attitudes for the concealed carrier in the church to have in order to act properly and within a manner and a behavior that would be acceptable, if not even beneficial and glorifying to God. These behaviors also carry over into any concealed carry situation you might find yourself in outside the church. That's a point of clarity on that. Now, if you don't mind, I'm a little nervous. I need a deep breath. So all of you stand up and take a deep breath with me, please. 1, 2, 3. I don't know if I feel better or not. I don't know if I feel better or not, but we're going to try. Here we go. Things are about to get tense. Pastor Randy talked about how we need to be a little uncomfortable and be a little bit tense. Well, I'm going there. So if you're not ready to be tense, then maybe you need to take another deep breath. Things might get a little uncomfortable while I'm up here. I might make some of you mad, even, or angry. I hope not. It's not my plan. We'll see how it goes. But first, a little levity. I'm going to start with a song. I'll have to endure this. As I walked up to church one Sunday morning, I saw pillars of smoke rising from the door. I rushed up to tell the leading deacon, "Get everyone out, the church is on fire for sure." He said, "That's a point well put and a timely suggestion that we'll bring up at the very next meeting of the Board of Deacons a week from Tuesday." I don't know why, it's just church policy. At the First Nazarene Method, Baptist-Costal, Seventh-day Orthodox, Presbyterian, non-denominational Church of Our Lady of the Mind. We were all right back the very next Sunday in a tent bought and paid for by the building fund. I saw a tornado on the horizon. I stood right up and told everyone to run. You guessed it. They said, "That's a point well put and a timely suggestion that we'll bring up at the very next meeting of the Board of Deacons a week from Tuesday." I don't know why, it's just church policy. At the First Nazarene Method, Baptist-Costal, Seventh-day Orthodox, Presbyterian, non-denominational Church of Our Lady of the Mind. We were all right back the very next Sunday when the trumpets blew and the clouds were rolled away. I stood up to tell the congregation, "Lift up your hearts, our Lord has come today." They said, "That's a point," everybody's saying, "That's a point well put and a timely suggestion that we'll bring up at the very next meeting of the Board of Deacons a week from Tuesday." I don't know why, it's just church policy. At the First Nazarene Method, Baptist-Costal, Seventh-day Orthodox, Presbyterian, non-denominational Church of Our Lady of the Mind. Oh, thank you. 8 weeks ago, 46 people got shot in a church in Texas. In 8 weeks, we've had occasion to improve our church security to whatever extent or whatever degree we've been inclined or led or moved to do. My mission here today is to give you, in the next 8 minutes, 8 things that you can do, 8 practical things that you can do in the next 8 hours before your church service tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock to prepare and equip yourself for the beginning of church security for your church services. Are you ready? Post a lookout. Post a lookout. Everywhere you have a door that people enter, post a lookout. Maybe you want to post a lookout somewhere where there's not a door. Now, your lookout should not be part of your greeter team. This is someone who should be in addition to your greeter team. Of course, you want your greeters being aware. You want your greeters being observant. But your lookout is specifically purposed and focused on that task of being observant and watching. If the people in the church in Texas had had a lookout, they would have seen, or the lookout would have seen, that there was a man in the parking lot walking up with an AR-15. Defense and reaction to an active shooter could have begun right then. Didn't have to wait until they got into the sanctuary. As the Brotherhood Insurance man spoke this morning, I'm sorry, the name escapes me. He said that your greeters should be watching. Well, certainly they should, but they can't do the job of shaking hands, helloing and glad-handing, and watching out for the perimeter as well. In the Air Force, we call that watching the perimeter. I've been doing that this morning, by the way. We're in a somewhat a hypocritical situation here. We're here at a church security workshop, and we don't have a lookout. We don't have anybody watching our perimeter, and the doors are not locked, which is the next thing I want to get to. Lock your doors. There's no reason in the world why your church doors can't be locked. All of them, including the ones that are most used. As long as you have a greeter there to open that door and let people in. If you're not going to lock it, then have a way to lock it quickly should your lookout see somebody coming up in the parking lot that looks suspicious or requires assessment. Our pastor, Pastor Randy, who spoke here earlier, I go to Pastor Randy's church, and our chief deacon now, he's back here in the group here today as well, described the act of the greeter's greeting and the lookout looking out to be accompanied with, what do you call it? Overwhelming hospitality. As long as you're engaging in overwhelming hospitality, greeting people at the door and letting them in, there's no reason that those doors can't be locked. As long as they're locked, you have a barrier between you and the bad guy. Now, your lookout should be there, and your door should be locked for the entire time that you are at the church. There's no reason for you to unlock them. And in the security situation we live in today, for you to unlock them for the first 20 minutes while everybody comes in, and then lock them, or leave them open as they are here right now, without a lookout. And your lookout should be there 24/7, the whole time that your church is in session. The guy who shot up the church in Texas came in the middle of the church service. Nobody was looking at. Okay, moving on. Lock your Sunday school classrooms, especially the children's. Once the teacher's in there and a child, lock that door. That teacher can do the same thing as your greeters at your church's front door and your church's side door, your church's parking lot door. That teacher, assuming you have 2 teachers, which is Baptist policy, I think, 2 teachers in a Sunday school classroom, especially a children's classroom, then their teachers can act with overwhelming hospitality and greet people at the door to let new people in. A few Sundays ago, while I was making rounds during the early church service, I actually stepped into the sanctuary for a few minutes to hear Pastor Randy's message. Once the message was over, I stepped out and I went back down to the children's area. The infant room had 2 babies in it and 2 teachers. The teachers were sitting there in the rocking chairs with their backs to the door. The door was closed, but the door was not locked. And they were rocking the infants. Just 2 teachers, 2 infants. I looked through the window. There's a window in the door. So I looked through it and I saw their position. I opened the door. I stepped in. I stepped back out. And I closed the door and I walked away, and they never knew that I had been there. They never knew. They had their backs to me. Lock your Sunday school classroom doors. Post a monitor. Brotherhood Insurance mentioned this morning. Post a monitor. I think Bonsai did too. Post a monitor in the children's hallways. By the way, your adult Sunday school classroom should be locked as well. Dylan Roof, who showed up to the Charleston church, was attending Bible study on Wednesday night. He was in with a group of adults. Just because you're an adult Sunday school classroom doesn't mean you shouldn't have your door locked. You can use the concept of overwhelming hospitality the same as anybody else, the people in your Sunday school classroom. You never know that the bad guy is not after somebody who is in your classroom. Everybody can, and I believe should. You have to do this with to your own level of comfort. Everybody can carry pepper spray. Pepper spray can be an effective, actually it is a very effective deterrent to aggression. Your children's Sunday school teachers, your adult Sunday school teachers, youth Sunday school teachers, your congregation members, your pastor, your choir director, everybody can carry pepper spray. Pepper spray comes in a lot of forms. It comes in canisters like law enforcement carries. This is about the size and shape of one, although it's not law enforcement issued. This is from Fox Labs. It has a spray of 15 feet. Wouldn't you like to stop the bad guy 15 feet away from you? I think I would.
You're not going to test that out.
I'm not going to test it.
That was the closest one, so I was
Pocket and keychain size, this is 2, that's 4 ounces by the way. This is 2 ounce. This spray is about 7 or 8 feet. Pepper spray comes in 2 different kinds of dispensing patterns. Spray and fog. I recommend spray. Or stream and fog. I recommend stream. A fog can be blown back in your face. You'll be pepper spraying yourself. Well, if the bad guy goes down and he's not threatening you, and you go down and you're not being threatened, I guess you're still okay. You just recover from the pepper spray. But I think you don't want to go through that. I would recommend that you take pepper spray canisters from Fox Labs. I'm not sponsored by Fox Labs, by the way. But my research shows they do the best. They make the best pepper spray. They make a canister that's 8 ounces or 16 ounces. It's about that big, about the size and shape of a fire extinguisher. I would recommend you take those or something like, because they spray 21 feet, by the way, the big ones, the fire extinguisher size. Or these that spray 15 or 16 feet, and mount them inside your Sunday school classroom doors, your children's department particularly, just like you might have a fire extinguisher posted. Put it up high on the wall so the kids can't get it. Bad guy tries to get into that door, and he's gotten past the lookout. He's gotten past your guard in your hallway. He's gotten past your campus safety product. I forgot the name of that thing. Sorry. There you go. He gets another plug. He's gotten past that, and your teacher has forgotten. We know teachers forget things. You go to church on Sunday. Teacher's forgotten her pepper spray. Right there on the wall, right by the door, or somewhere posted strategically in the classroom, can be a fire extinguisher-sized pepper spray. Interdiction of the bad guy begins right there. Check the playground before the kids go out. Know the time, or have your Sunday school teachers, your children's teachers coordinate with the safety team, safety committee, safety person, when they're going to go out on the playground, and have somebody go out on the playground ahead of them by themselves without the kids to monitor that playground, check the area, do a scan. And then once the kids come out, that person stays out there with them. Monitor your playground. Protect your kids. By my list, that should be 7. Number 8, do all of these things all the time, every time, without fail. Jesus taught us in Matthew 24:42 and scriptures following, King James Version, that the thief comes when you think not. Don't ever think not. Jesus also said he's coming when you think not. That prompts me to want to think not. If I think not, maybe he'll come. Don't ever, 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 ever think not. Every time you gather, whether it's on Wednesday night, Sunday morning, Sunday night, even your midweek or off-night week Bible studies, we have a ladies group that meets either on Tuesday or Thursday. All groups should be looking out for the protection themselves or coordinating with a safety group, safety team themselves for security posture like this. If you're supposed to look out, let's go back to the beginning. If you're supposed to look out and he does his job or she does her job, then maybe none of these other things would be necessary. It doesn't hurt to have, matter of fact, it's important to have, it's beneficial to have, it's prudent to have multi-layers of security keeping you and the bad guy away from each other. Those are my 8 points. Now, I'd like to add a 9th point. This is not something that you can do, or I can tell you about in 8 minutes, that you can do in 8 hours before your service 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. But it's something that's been discussed here a little bit, and I'm going to give a little bit of a demonstration here. I'd like to ask for 2 people to come up and help me. Is Bonsai still here? Please.
Marty.
No. I'm going to ask Al Delancey to come up. Al is a friend of mine. He knows me and he trusts me. Oh, well, Bonsai and I have never met. Maybe he trusts me. He doesn't have to yet. But you trust Bonsai and Al trusts me. I'm going to give a firearms demonstration. If you are scared of firearms, now's the time to get in touch with your fear. I brought these people up here to be the safety valve. These are the fail-safe. As I do my firearms demonstration, they are going to do 3 things. They're going to make sure I keep the muzzle pointed in a safe direction. They're going to make sure I keep my finger off the trigger. And they're going to make sure that I demonstrate to them that the firearm is clear or unloaded and therefore not a threat. You guys ready? I'd like for each of you to stand on one side of me and the other. We're going to go up there. I'm going to put the microphone down. It's not spiked.
Looks like a Mountain Dew.
It might be real Mountain Dew. So about first account.
The solution to interdicting an active shooter is active shooting back. Please. The solution to interdicting a mass shooter is mass shooting back. Everybody who runs gets shot. Everybody who hides gets shot. The most assured way to stop the active shooter is to shoot back. Active shooter can come into your church equipped like this. In order for you to completely and unequivocally and effectively interdict him, take shooting back. Thank you. I've had my say.
I can just piggyback on what he just said. 5 seconds ago. The only person that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. That's the bottom line, and I totally agree with his last statement.
By the way, I guess I'm not quite through. I got one more statement to make. I'm carrying 3 more. You don't get to see them because they are loaded and ready to go.
Okay, who counted how many guns he has then? How many?
45?
Wish. Okay. I'll just say this. That's very powerful to see, because when people come through our doors, we don't know what they're carrying. So that's a great illustration of we really don't know what people have. So how many guns? Was it 7 that you took
I
off?
pulled out 6 and I'm carrying 3.
Okay, so that's 9, if my math is correct.
The most I've ever done this demonstration with is 13.
Glenn, come back and sit up here. Bonsai. I see Matt. Come on up here. Ed, you want to come on up here to the front? We're just gonna have a time of Q&A. If you have some questions that you wanted to ask and didn't have a chance to. Now, I don't want to prolong this, so if you have some questions, we want to, because that's really, I had a good friend years ago who said, if you scratch somebody where they itch, you know, it feels good, but if you scratch them where they don't itch, it's an irritation. So we don't want to irritate anybody, but if you have some questions, this would be a great time. We have security experts, people that are, this is their full-time business, and so feel free to ask some questions. We have 2 mics, I think, right? Or 3.
We got 2 there and 1 for questions. If you have a question, raise your hand.
Okay.
So we can-
Yeah, because we're filming this, that'll be good. Okay? Good.
So language, I think, shapes, importantly, how we think about things and then how we act upon these things we're thinking about. And so part of my suggestion, especially when we're thinking in terms of church, is to think carefully about our language and to think about how we talk about this within the congregation. And one example, and I think, Matt, it comes from your presentation, is the language of deploy and deployment is military language. And I understand it. And so my critique of that is just, what are other ways that we can think about that as church? These terms, serve, service, and I don't have the answer yet. I'm still mulling that around in my own mind. But I don't want safety teams within the church to think of themselves as a kind of military unit. So I just want to think about language, though, again, I don't have the answer for that. I'm just kind of thinking through that, and you guys may have some ways to help me with that as we think about within the church congregation, the ways to talk about these things with a kind of ecclesial or church-based language that'll help people understand what we're after.
Yeah, you can approach it as a safety and security ministry. You don't have to even call it a team. And then it's those crawl, walk, run steps. You know, most churches aren't going to be able to start coming out of the gate running. There's still churches that haven't even started crawling yet when it comes to certain things. So there's still churches that have been doing security for a while, and they're still in the crawl stage. It's a learning process, but at least starting something, and you know, just making yourself a hard target, making those basic things that you can do. Doesn't even take money to do that. Then as you want to get further and further, you've got stuff, what Robert does, they'll come in, they'll do a 2-day training with you guys. They'll do different stuff if you want to get more advanced. But yeah, you can just call it a ministry. I know we use the word deploy and different things, and you know, sometimes, you know, church, we need to soften that up a little bit, but at the same time, I think too, we don't need to soften it up.
Right, and I'm not suggesting a softening
Oh, yeah,
of
no,
language, you know, because just in that, you know, we act like deploy is the hard word and we're finding a softer word. That's not necessarily what I'm after. I'm just thinking about how can we as churches engage the conversation as churches and not as other entities. And again, I don't have the answer for that, but I just, you know, I'm just trying to think through with the group the ways in which the language could help the church think through what we're doing as church rather than as a business or as Fort Knox or those type things, because there are differences. And then, so that's just kind of what I'm mulling around in my own head.
I think if you, and I ran into this when we did 10 years ago at Clement, when I first met with the deacons, and whether you think God had something to do with it, but because with the Sheriff's Department, I've been with them almost 20 years part-time, I was on the way to my meeting with the deacons to present what I want to do with the safety security team. And what happened was, as I was going there, another church, because it was Wednesday night, another church was having their meeting, and a lady pulled into their parking lot, and it was coming over my radio. And I took it into the meeting with me with the deacons. This was actively going on. She was a domestic. Her husband chased her into the parking lot. They were in there having their deacons meeting at this church on the other side of the county. The deacons were calling for the sheriff's department, calling 911, because her husband was outside beating the windows out of her car with a baseball bat. At the same time, I was getting ready to do my presentation for safety and security. That sort of spoke for itself. We're not all that lucky. One of the things that you want to look at, and this is what we looked at for us at Clement, was our children. I started from a nursery security standpoint, just having a check-in, check-out is how we first broached the subject. And then from that standpoint, I was able to ask them, hey, can we go ahead and put a medical component in, because we have all these nurses that go to church here, we have all these EMTs and paramedics and first responders with the fire department that go to church here. Because we all have to jump up in the middle when our pagers go off anyhow, so everybody knows that we have firefighters in the church. Why don't we incorporate them to be our first responders here at church? And then and I didn't call our security people security guards or security, I call them security attendants. And what they did is they had all they did was put an orange armband on, just to identify them, that's what their job was, and they had their radio. And all they did is they stayed in their positions. I only had 2 on duty at a time with us, but basically the one was roving, and he locked all the doors and checked on both nurseries. The one door that remained open, which was the main door to the sanctuary, like what we would have here, when the other ushers actually went forward for passing out the plates and all that stuff, he remained back there and he maintained security at that door, so that I had a first line of defense. If somebody came in disruptive or whatever, someone just had a question, there was someone always back there that was not unattended. So basically, I instead of using a security, I pushed it more as an attendant type situation. That was not an usher, that had other responsibilities. Their primary job was just maintaining the security or being a greeter at the door that didn't leave, just to be able to sort of interdict anything that could happen and notify those of us inside the sanctuary with radios if something may be going on.
So in listening to that comment, as well as Mr. Gage, what you were just saying, it kind of touches on something, and I'm curious to hear from you all. One of the things I know I've struggled with is how do you I found Randy's comments earlier today very, very helpful. That tension between security and hospitality. You want to protect, but you don't want to be questioning every new person who walks through the door. I mean, I've heard from different places today that kind of sense of, maybe that one of the mindsets is, if you will, you don't ask your ushers to be security, you don't ask your security to be ushers, kind of a division of responsibilities in a way that allows for the overwhelming hospitality, but also, and I guess what I'm just curious to know is am I hearing correctly that when we think about security, this really needs to almost be kind of a separate, you can't lump it in with another, it needs to really be a separate function, and then you have that group that functions whose primary job is, or can there be combination? I'd just be curious to hear your thoughts and responses to that question.
In my situation, I kept it separate because a lot of and I rotated around. If you were working one Sunday, hopefully you weren't back on working with us for 2 more Sundays. But what I basically did is a lot of the folks, especially that were security attendants, were also ushers, but when they were doing ushering, they were ushers. When they were on security assignment, they were security. So that way, there was no mix-up on which one they were supposed to do. I think it's very important, like you said, that even the people that are security need to be people-friendly. They need to be able to engage people and not escalate situations. If you have someone upset, an irate ex-husband or whatever that shows up looking for his wife that's in there at that church or whatever, if you have that situation going on, they need to be able to de-escalate that situation. They need to be able to calm that situation down. And that goes through training again and picking the right people, like Matt brought out earlier, that when you're selected, you need to invite these folks in. You don't want to go, hey, we're having an open call for security. I need to know how many people want to do it. You need to know who you're picking, and going back and having professional law enforcement to maybe head that up so they can help. Because when I used to run the academy for Garland, and one of the things that we did is we would pick who would not make it. After the first week, we know who probably is not going to make it through the academy, and probably we were 96% accurate. There was a few that would surprise us that would make it, and there was a few that surprised us that didn't make it. But for the most part, you could tell after that first week they're not going to make it. And whether it was physical abilities, attitude, whatever, you just could tell. And it's the same. So I would not want someone in your church. Y'all have been going to your churches for a while. You know who's there, who has what qualities. You need to have a good. And I know in Baptist churches we like starting committees. What we did is we call it a safety security team, because I didn't want to have to go through all the process and start the committee. But the thing is, one thing we did on the team is that we had a deacon and then our team, and I had a rotating deacon on, as a deacon rotated, that person would change, but that way the deacons were actively involved in what the team was doing. They knew what they were doing, as well as if something was happening on the team that they didn't like, the deacon board could step in and say, hey, we don't want to go in this direction or whatever. So I think you've got to have a really good working relationship with your deacon board, as well as with the pastor and associate. Everybody has to be involved at that level of staff. Even at Clement, we had one church secretary, but she needed to be involved because she was the one that was getting my schedules out. So I needed to make sure that she knows who's on duty and who's doing what responsibility. Because being a community church, you might be working security this week, you may be on the medical team next week, and then you may be an usher the following week. So you just need to know which position you were filling.
Regarding hospitality and separation of function or duties, I'll cite an example related to myself that two in particular, that took place, one a year ago for our Founders Day, not this past November, but the previous November, and then one that took place regarding our church's hosting of an ESL class. It was first day of registration for ESL class, and of course we had 5 or 6 guests come in. I was doing lookout duty that day. We also had greeters there in the name of the church, and we also had greeters there at the door in the name of the ESL class. That was somebody else who set up that function. I didn't do that. I was just there to be lookout. Well, as they came in, I did my survey or my assessment of what they were wearing, how they were dressed, how they were acting, how their demeanor was, whether they seemed nervous or anxious or nervous or anxious, maybe unkempt, in a hurry. And so those that I didn't perceive any obvious designators from, indicators from, I watched them come in the door as the other greeters greeted them, and I followed them down the hallway a little bit to see how they acted once they got in the church. I'd leave my lookout position in order to do that, because I felt like in that circumstance, looking out for who was in the building was more important than looking out for who was outside the building. And I was the only one there. It couldn't do both. So I followed them until they got to their classroom. They greeted the teacher. They pulled their Bible out of their purse or their pocket or whatever, sat down, and everything was fine. And I'd go back to the lookout position. One student came in carrying a huge white canvas bag draped over their shoulder. You'll have to pardon me for stereotyping, but it looked like, well, it was a huge shopping bag. I won't stereotype. It was a shopping bag. And it was monstrous. It could have carried anything. Well, I took particular note of him. To me, that was an indicator. Somebody I didn't know, someone stranger and new to our fellowship, and carrying a huge bag. So I did with that person the same as I did with the others, except I walked on into the classroom behind the ESL greeter and that person that they were escorting to the class. And I stayed in the classroom and stood right beside the teacher and helped out with the greetings and the hellos and the how are yous until I got some sort of feel of what was in that bag. Either he'd pull things out, or he would open it up and look in and say, comment to himself, okay, I got this, I got that, or he just set it aside way away from everybody or himself so that it was not readily accessible. And I stayed there maybe an extra 30 seconds, 45 seconds, until I felt comfortable that this was not a threat anymore. And then I went back to my lookout position. Over a year ago, at our Founders Day, we had a person show up who stopped in to have a meal and fellowship with us, who was just traveling down the highway and was looking for a place to stop and worship. It was somebody we didn't know, and when they came up to the building and our greeters greeted him, he introduced himself that way. I took note of his description, what it looked like, and I passed it on to others who I trusted for security that day. They might not necessarily have been on duty that day, but they're security-minded. And I passed on description to him and what he said he was all about to them. And as Founders Day progressed, and he moved around to Sunday school classes, and he moved around to the fellowship meal, and he moved around into the worship service, somebody had their eye on him until we were comfortable with him.
I was once the choir director at Mount Moriah Baptist Church. When the incident down in Texas occurred, I immediately thought about Mount Moriah. I thought about Bahama Baptist. Thought about Edgewood. I thought, and what I'm so impressed with the strong turnout this morning is that, and also disappointed, to be honest with you. I'm impressed that there are so many smaller churches represented here today. Small churches need security just as much as larger churches do. And a lot of larger churches, and in fact, quite a few of the largest Baptist churches in North Carolina have our product. But I'm just, but the concern that we have is for smaller churches as well. I'm disappointed that larger churches didn't feel it necessary to be here this morning. And I think that sometimes that, and a lot of larger churches do have a security team, a security ministry already established, and maybe they're trained. And I'm glad to know that. But there's a lot that we could, as smaller churches, could learn from information sharing from those larger churches that already have an established security ministry. I think that it's important that we do profile, as he said, that as we're as we have a security team established, and it might be a couple of people, but those people are aware and those people are diligent as people are coming in. Being aware of the, maybe that it's a face that they don't necessarily recognize, and it could be a very recognizable face that causes a significant disruption in the worship service or the Bible study or the prayer meeting. But I think it's important that we treat it with due diligence, at the same time being careful to not jump the gun, so to speak. So, and that all comes with training. We're to the point where it comes as second nature to you there's also signals that the security team can share with each other. I've got this. I've got this. There's this situation, and you can pass it just hand signals or clicking the radio or something like that lets you that lets your colleagues on the security team understand that there might be something going down without having to make a big commotion about it and making people uncomfortable. You don't want to do that unnecessarily, but it's important that you go through those types of very they might seem very elementary, but they are mission critical. The steps that we've gone through, really those 9 steps. I think that it's very important that we implement those multiple layers of security, no matter how small the congregation we are.
If I could just mention one thing too before we go to the next question. The pastor too, or associate pastors that you have, if they're ministering to a couple or to a situation and they know that this situation is potentially volatile, they need to let the security team know that as well. They don't have to get into the nitty-gritty details of what this couple may be going through or what may be going on, whoever they're working with, but they still need to make them aware that there's a potential situation. That was one thing I was always blessed with, is that we had a particular person that would go from one church within Person County to another church, and I remember a particular one pastor who was our pastor at the time when we had the team. He came to me and he said, "I've got information. This guy's coming to our church next Sunday. I'm not expecting anything, but I just want to make you aware. He's caused problems at other churches, disrupted and things like that. And I just want you to be aware that he's going to be here next week." Fortunately, he came to our church. He saw what we had in place and everything. I guess he just decided he didn't want to do anything. But he did come. He sat quietly and he spoke to folks and then he left. But if you don't have that communication between your local associations, your local churches, whether they're Baptist or not, I mean, pastors talk to each other and they need, ministers talk. They need to be able to have that communication. If there's a problem in your area, they need to communicate. Communication is the key. Knowing that there's an issue or the potential issue that could occur, and making your security team or whatever you have in place aware, even if it's your ushers or anybody, just making them aware, hey, there's a potential problem that could happen.
David, I'll hand you the microphone just a second. I'm going to completely change the topic. This is safety concern, and I've always wondered about this. When I was an associate minister at Yates, and that's dealing with winter weather policy, which we all are sort of dealing with. But when I began my ministry, we would have church every Sunday. I don't care if there was 10 or 15 inches of snow. Our pastor was able to walk, and we'd have 20 or 30 that had the vehicles, would brave and be there, and there were great worship services. But then we had a discussion years later that maybe it was not such a good idea to have that type of policy, and particularly if it snowed on a Friday or bad weather on a Saturday where you didn't have a chance to scrape the sidewalks or the parking lot. But is there any insurance questions there? Is there any suggested policy on what churches should do when winter weather occurs? I know some churches with the first snowflake, it's canceled, and others try to do their best to keep the services ongoing. And again, that was a discussion question at the church I was at, Yates, wonderful church. But just was wondering if that is something that is now discussed with churches on what they should do.
I think you need to use your best judgment, especially if you have a lot of elderly in your church. You know, it's hard for them to get out. There's nothing wrong with canceling a church service, especially, you know, last 2 weeks. I lived in California for 14 years. I just moved back to the Midwest, so I've been in for a rude awakening. This last 2 weeks in Indiana, we've had a high of 2 or 3. Iowa, that polar vortex swept through. My parents' church in Iowa canceled church because it was cold temperatures, so I don't see any problem with it. As far as insurance, Daily, if you don't have church on a day like that, you're gonna potentially reduce risk and claims because you're not having somebody slip or fall on their sidewalk. And slip, trips, and falls are our #1 claim across our company. You can't really track that but what we do track is all the injuries that come from that. You know, the person slips, they break a hip, they're in the hospital, in a rehab. So cancel a church service and you can come up with 5 inches or whatever. But I think you're right. It's, a few snowflakes. People can get there, they get there. But if you're talking a significant amount of snow, and I think more important than snow is the cold weather and ice, then I'd really consider not having a church service. You guys will be there next Sunday anyway, so.
A lot of our churches have people in them who are very much opposed to firearms as much as somebody who's a member of the NRA is in favor of. Have any of you had the experience starting a conversation like we've had here today without creating a rift between those two groups in the church?
In particular, I actually was the cause of the rift because being a police officer, I always carried. And someone saw my gun on my ankle one day when I crossed my leg the wrong way, and they said something to the pastor about Bob's got a gun on his ankle. He's in church, and the pastor said, "Well, Bob's a police officer." And it was mentioned earlier about your concealed carry laws. If you make it a policy that no concealed carry holder can have their weapon in your church, which is your prerogative, that doesn't apply to any law enforcement, retired or active duty. We are allowed to carry anywhere except federal buildings. So we can carry in your church anytime we want to. The law under the Public Safety Officers Act that was passed right after 9/11, HR 218, we're allowed to carry nationwide as long as we are actively certified or we are following retired qualification policies within our state. So that being said, a police officer, a law enforcement officer is probably going to carry, and that's how the pastor broached that. Now, I actually went to the person to complain because I wanted to have clear the air, and I explained to them that I felt that I would be remiss as a Christian myself, that if I had the skills and the ability to protect my church from something happening, and I left my gun in my car because I didn't want to offend somebody, and someone came in that church and killed people, and I didn't stop it because I wasn't armed, I would be failing in my duties to protect. I would be falling down on my work as a sworn law enforcement officer. I have a hard time as a firearms instructor talking to sworn police officers that don't carry off duty. I have a big problem with that. You're a police officer, you're trained, unless you're drinking, because it's against policy for agencies. If you have alcohol in your system, you're not supposed to. But other than that, if you're sober, you should be carrying a gun. And my wife, she had a problem when we first got married because every time I was upright, I had a gun on. But she finally got over that. And actually, a situation that happened to her, and my stepson, her youngest son, we were in a grocery store together, and the suspect I'd arrested the week before approached me and my stepson when he was 8 years old. And basically, I had to deal with that situation. Fortunately, I didn't have to pull my gun, but I had to let him know that if he tried to do something stupid with my child there, me and my son were going to walk out of there, and he wasn't. And so that was a situation that, I carried that with me for the rest of my life. I'll never forget that situation. And those of you that are law enforcement, have been law enforcement, know what I'm talking about, because we arrest a lot of bad people. And at the same time, our churches are open, but we are open to everybody. And we welcome sinners to come to our church. Well, unfortunately, there are sinners, and we had this discussion out in the lobby out there. There are sinners that are coming to your church to take advantage of your church. And we see that happening all the time nationwide where things happen, whether it's sexual abuse or whether it's people that come in and commit fraud and end up stealing from the church or whatever. It's not just active shooter. There's bad people out there that would take advantage of you because you're a church. And we have to protect ourselves from everything, including that. So if you have that issue in your church where they don't want you to carry guns, I would just talk about it. That person completely understood when I spoke to them. I said, I'm a police officer and I'm always going to carry it. And I feel it's my sworn duty to protect you, to protect my kids, protect my wife. And if I do not do that, I swore in the Bible that oath, and I take it very seriously.
Let me ask a question real quick here. As a pastor, I have a question because I do want to actually go to a recent case, which is Charleston. And I want to give you the perspective as a minister, as a parishioner, and then give you the perspective as a security team. In Charleston, you have a young man walks into a Bible study, right? Into a historic African American church. I assume that they were happy. Well, actually, I assume they were like, this kid must be in trouble to come on. So Wednesday night? It was a weekday. I think it was Wednesday. He came, he must be in trouble. There was no, I assume there was no profiling because he was sitting next to the pastor. They were so friendly towards the kid. Who would have thought that, right? The church completely was welcome that someone was coming to receive the word of God. As a minister, I am happy. As a parishioner, I would be happy too. This is someone that we're looking into saying, he needs God, right? Now, and this is what Mark was talking about. Here comes the other side, and this is what we want to hear from. Because we want you to break it down to us on how a security team could have handled that situation if he was present at that church. I have to give that example because that example, it really did happen, obviously. It took a lot of lives. Completely the guard was down. And there was, not profiling, but there was a more sense of welcoming. But again, like you said, it was betrayed. So, we don't see someone and we judge them. We don't take a look up to them and say, what are you doing here? And like that, actually, we're more welcoming. But the security team is the one that actually looks onto a character. So what would be how a security team would have handled a night like that?
I think I'll give you two answers to that. Number one, if there had been a member of the security team in the Bible study, and this is just me personally, Jerry would probably do the same thing. When he started shooting, it was during prayer time. Everyone had their heads bowed. I may bow my head, but I don't close my eyes. Never have. I'm still watching everybody. So if there had been a member of the security team in there at that time, when he pulled his weapon, they could have engaged the suspect and stopped the threat. Hopefully with minimal injuries or death. If there had been a security team on duty, when the first shot rang out, they would have responded to the sound of gunfire, and hopefully before he would have finished killing people, because as Glenn brought out, the only thing that stops a bad guy is a good guy with a gun, and you have to engage them in a gunfight. Typical active shooters, that was a perfect situation for an active shooter. He wanted to shoot people that were unarmed and defenseless. He had a whole room full. So what they do not expect is someone responding appropriately with deadly force and stopping them. Typically what the active shooter will do when confronted with law enforcement or someone who is on a security team, someone is prepared to deal with that situation, they will either commit suicide, die in a gunfight, or surrender. Those are the only three choices they have. Either way, the threat gets stopped. And they have stopped shooting innocent people that are in the audience, because now they're engaging me, or they're engaging, or they're giving up, or they're killing themselves, one or the other. And so once that, the key is that once a positive defense is being presented against that type of coward, and that's what I call them, they're gonna give up. One way or the other. One of those three ways is they're gonna stop. And we have to just be prepared to present that. If there had not been a security person in that group, he would have still killed several people. That's just the nature of an active shooter. They're gonna keep shooting till they're stopped, and, or till they run out of ammunition, and then they'll say that last round for themselves or go out in a blaze of glory. But they are not gonna stop shooting till there's some type of deadly force that confronts them and make them give up. Does that answer your question?
If you'd had some lookout, and maybe some monitors in between the various layers of security that I mentioned, it's possible that he would have been suspected, if not interdicted, long before he began shooting. And depending on the results of that assessment, somebody might have, on the security position, may have determined to stay with him the entire time he was in Bible study. Other than that, what do you reckon would have been the result if he shot 9 people? I'm thinking that there were 15 or so in the Bible study. What if the 9 people who got shot, or all 15 who were in the Bible study, had responded with 15-foot streams of pepper spray right at him right then, right now? He might have gone off 1 shot, 2 shots, but somewhere along the way when that pepper spray hit his face, his actions would have been interrupted, allowing those who were of a mindset and aggressive enough to wrestle him down and get that gun away from him or point it in a different direction might have been able to mitigate that circumstance. That's why I said everybody ought to be carrying pepper spray. You don't have to be a security person. You don't have to be a safety person. You don't have to be a young person. You don't have to be an aggressive person. Anybody can carry pepper spray.
I think also, if there had been someone who was overtly security, that was obvious that that person was playing a security role that could have mitigated that situation, where because it was obvious to him that it was a totally soft target, indefensible soft target, and but if he knew that there was someone there who would have put up a defense against him, more than there was a good chance, nobody knows, but there's a good chance that the first shot would not have gone off if that was the case.
There's another half to that answer. I'm not opposed to obvious security existing in a church. One thing I like to do, however, when it comes to security people, security team, security committee in a church is not use the word security. I've been bantering it around here in this gathering because that's the word that you're used to. My personal preference is safety. Completely throw away the word security and begin to use the word safety would be my preference. Safety team, safety committee, safety program, safety function, safety posture. Because when you use the word security, you put a target on the security people's back and they get to be the first ones that are shot. Now, if there had been one security guy who was obvious in this Bible study, and Dylan Roof knew who that was, the very first shot he took would probably have been at that security person. Well, then your security posture is gone, and he's free to shoot the rest of everybody else, assuming they don't have pepper spray. Are you catching a recurring theme here?
You were speaking of soft targets, and we're a small church, and we're kind of a double soft target because we rent in a public school for our worship service. And what would your perspective or suggestions be regarding security in a rental area or a public school, which they don't really like you carrying?
That's a situation I actually deal with as well because I go to Summit, but I go to the Riverside campus, and we're in the high school at Riverside High School, and I know me personally, I'm not going to say anything to a fellow parishioner who I know has a concealed carry that may have their gun on, but technically they're breaking the law because they're on school property. So they're committing a felony. Now, they can keep it locked in their vehicle because they changed that law to where if you're a concealed carry holder, you can lock it in your vehicle, but you cannot go in the facility with that weapon if it's a school property. And that applies to private schools too. So if your school is if your church has a private school, that's a school facility in North Carolina. That's a whole other issue. But that's where you may have to hire off-duty law enforcement, whether sheriff's department, police department, to work at your school, at your facility, because it is a school. I know Summit does that. Several other churches have done it for years. I mean, when I worked for the city, there were a lot of officers that worked Sunday mornings, mainly doing traffic at churches. But now with everything that's been going on, those have all been escalated to where they have interior duties and all that stuff as well. So I would reach out to your local law enforcement if you're working in a school, if you can incorporate it in your budget. I don't know which county you're in, but if you could reach out to them and see what the off-duty rate is. And typically, they hire minimum 3 hours, which would cover most services before and after Sunday morning. But that would be my suggestion, so that your folks that are parishioners there don't get caught breaking the law. You're not going to get charged for carrying pepper spray or carrying concealed weapon.
Amanda had a question from you earlier about tasers. Go ahead, Amanda.
Yeah, that's what it's about. The pepper spray was mentioned as a deterrent from afar. It's really good. What about a taser gun and the laws on that?
If you have,
Can you repeat that question just for the...
she was asking about a taser, and Taser International actually sells a civilian version of a taser with that and this is, if you're interested, I'm not trying to sell the product, but they have a pretty cool policy that if you deploy your taser, because there's a law enforcement taser is set up to where if I tase somebody, it'll tase them as long as I hold the trigger. When I let off the trigger, it'll go for about 5 seconds after that, and then I'm supposed to take them into custody. Hopefully it works. After they ride the lightning, we're able to take them into custody. It doesn't always work, but there's people that can defeat the taser. I had a good friend of mine that when they tased him as a police officer, and he walked through it, and he was talking the whole time, I can take it, I can take it. We were all in shock. And they were, the officer that was tasing, his eyes were like, oh my God, I hope we never have to tase this guy. But, so it can be done. The thing about the civilian version of the taser is that if you tase somebody and you get away, because what it does, it gives them a 30-second ride on the electricity. That's to give you time to run away. If you get a police report saying you tased someone and it saved your life, taser gives you a brand new one for free. They replace it as long as you have your police report. I just mentioned that just because that's a pretty cool policy. A taser is not considered a deadly weapon, so if you had one in your purse or whatever, or your backpack, in the school, I wouldn't advertise that I had it, if that makes sense. But working at the university, we would take them away from students. We wouldn't charge them with it, but we had a lot of parents that would issue their daughters tasers and pepper spray when they came to North Carolina Central University because they're a girl. Same thing happens at Duke. But at the same time, we find them with, we actually as a police department did not bother them unless they did something stupid like spray somebody in the cafeteria, which we've had happen, because they got mad at some other girl, so they sprayed her. You're going to get charged then. But if you use it in defense of yourself, most law enforcement agencies that I know of, Gary, you would want, I don't see where anyone would be charged for using a taser or pepper spray if they were defending themselves, following the North Carolina General Statute. You're right to defend yourself.
So does it have to be, as far as carry, does it have to be, can you conceal it?
Yeah, they're made to be concealed.
Right.
Yeah. So, and there's a difference between a taser and a stun gun. The stun gun is the one with the little prongs where I can reach out and touch somebody and hold it on. That's a stun gun. A taser actually deploys 2 fishhook-like prongs, and they embed in the person and they get shot. Neither one of them, they're considered less lethal force because people have died from them, but it's not because different things, maybe medical problem conditions they had before, but they are not, so it's not considered deadly force, but if it's improperly applied, it could cause someone to die. So that's the one thing. Now, if deadly force is authorized and you're defending yourself in a deadly force situation, and you kill them with your taser, then you're legal. Because deadly force is deadly force. If I hit you in the head with a brick, but I was authorized to do it, and I killed you, then I'm okay, I'm still covered, whether I shot you or I hit you with a brick. So that's one thing a lot of people think, well, you can't use deadly force, or I can't stab somebody, but if they got a gun and I manage to stab them and I win, then that's fine.
I gotta ask, because somebody wondered, the guy who defeated the taser, did he or could he defeat pepper spray?
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Could he defeat 15 pepper spray?
probably not 15. He would have been distracted enough that 15 people could have jumped him. And that's the whole thing. One thing you have is numbers, and if you can, in any fight, those of you that have done either martial arts or boxing or anything, if you can fake somebody out and then hit them with that sucker punch, then you're always going to win. But you got to make sure you land it. If you can distract someone long enough to get an advantage, that's what you want to do, and that's what pepper spray will give you, is that 3 seconds, 5 seconds, that they're distracted, they're stunned for a second, so that someone can jump on their back and choke this guy out or do whatever they need to do.
One more question, so can it be carried on school property?
It's usually, a taser is usually up to the school's policy, so that's what you need to check into. General statute doesn't address it because it's not a deadly, it's not a firearm. The general statute addresses firearm. But now the local schools, like Durham Public Schools or whatever, can say no deadly weapon, no knives, and it can specifically mention no knives, pepper spray, tasers. It can have that in there, so you need to check the school's policies.
I'm going to ask, I know we're past 12 and a few people had to leave, and if you do have to, are there some more burning questions? Okay. Okay, I'm going to get 2 questions, and then I'm going to ask these guys to stay around, and you can come and personally talk to them. So we'll do these 2, and if you need to go, we understand. But thank you for being here. But let's get ready to those.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of the tragedies we hear, have heard about over the past years have dealt with mental health issues, and a lot of them seem to really have been preventable if the people observing, or the people in the lives of the people that were involved had a better process to share information, and we could take the stigma away from, I don't want to accuse it, this is my cousin, or this is my friend, or this is my friend's son, or something like that. I'm interested in figuring out how to educate, our church and our people into being comfortable with saying, there's a little something going on, and getting it to a place where it can be processed in an organized way. In other words, maybe that's just raising our observation, making sure your people on your security team know about it, maybe suggesting or trying to get help for someone who's experiencing this, because it seems like a lot of it just gets ignored because people aren't comfortable raising the alarm. Are there resources available, training available, or other things like that we can engage to, create policy and create a program to deal with that? Because like I said, it seems to me like the vast majority of them, you could argue all of them are some kind of mental health problem, and often it's recognizable, but there's no comfortable process to carry it through and prevent these kinds of things.
I know that for public safety officers, for law enforcement, EMS, and fire, we have what's called CIT training, which is crisis intervention training. It's a week-long course that pretty much all of us are required to go through to deal with mental health issues, substance abuse issues, and dealing with those type of basically, instead of suspects, we call them patients or clients, because like you said, if they're having a mental health issue, it's something they probably can't control or haven't tried to control yet, and now we're having to deal with it because it's become a public safety issue. They're now a threat to the community or to themselves or whatever. I don't know what the offers are in the private sector. I can look up for you and see what I can find out. In the meantime, I would suggest maybe going to your local mental health in your county and asking, is there any type of civilian training for dealing with mental mental health issues or mental health recognition. I know that most law enforcement agencies in the state have all taken CIT training. That's something that's gone statewide in North Carolina. And what that would do is give you a resource that if you had that type of situation, you may want to call or request a CIT officer to come over and talk with this individual, see what they can recommend, maybe begin the commitment process or whatever to get this person some help, with voluntary, involuntary commitment, but get them the kind of help they need. I realize coming from a church setting, you know, the pastor obviously probably would want to be involved in maybe ministering to this person and helping them see that they need to get some assistance. But if it's, you know, the big thing is if you say, Bonsai's a little off, but I don't know if he's dangerous or not. Well, if I'm doing something that exhibits that maybe I am dangerous, you need to say something to somebody to get that information out there. And you mentioned previous, you know, I look at Henry Cho at Virginia Tech. He was in mental health treatment, but because of the laws, you weren't able to access his mental health information, so he was able to buy those weapons. I'm a firm believer in the Second Amendment, and I believe that everybody that has a legal right and is authorized to carry a gun should have one. I'm a firm believer in that. But at the same time, I also am a realist and know there are people that have issues that should not have a gun. And they should not they shouldn't have access to a butter knife lots of times. And those are the types of people that I think we as a society as a whole fail, because they do have access to those things. They do have, and because of HIPAA laws and things like that, information does not get passed on because we don't want to violate their rights. Well, I understand that, but when they're a public safety issue, I think the greater good is taking care of everybody else. That's my personal opinion. That's Bonsai's opinion. That's not CSP or anything. But I just wanted to mention that call your local law enforcement, see if they have CIT officers. Like I said, fire departments, EMS have those people as well. Check with your local mental health and see what kind of training might be available for your church. That their social workers may be able to come out and give you some training.
While you deliver that microphone, I'd like to make a couple of points. First of all, to your question, the quick and easy answer is probably not. Probably not going to be able to have a conversation that will effectively sway the minds of the non-gun people in a short amount of time. Having said that, information is a powerful thing. Personal experience in one of my concealed carry classes, which took place not long ago, about 2 months ago, I had a young man in my class from a church, not my church, and he came in and the class is 8 hours long. At the 6-hour mark, this young man had not given any kind of indication of his opinion or belief or posture regarding guns at all. He just came in to take the class, and I'm teaching it. About 6 hours into the class, it was break time. I announced break. He took his textbook and laid it open there on that lap, and he looked up and he said, "I'm not scared of guns anymore." He learned. People who don't know typically are the ones who are scared of guns, or don't know all of the safety rules, don't know how people who are carrying guns, particularly concealed carriers who have been to the North Carolina training class, are taught to be safe with guns. It makes a difference. It makes a vast difference. If a gathering of such people who would be willing to listen would accept such information as far as training and teaching goes, then maybe some minds could not be swayed, at least be comforted, and to the point of allowing others who have been trained to carry guns.
Our church is very missional minded, so I participate in international missions, and I haven't heard anybody kind of speak on what are some safety things that we can do, especially, you know, if we go to the Middle East or we go to Belize, someone was murdered there from the U.S. If you could just give us some insight or some additional information of how we need to proceed with safety for missions, especially international.
I had to, at the university, we had students that did international travel. They went to China and different places. They went to Europe and were graduate students that were associated with programs. The big thing we did to prepare students before going was obviously giving them all the contact information for the consulates, wherever they're going to be, get in touch with the U.S. Embassy, get help if they had to. And we would also make sure that they had some type of international phone that they could call back to North Carolina and tell us, hey, I'm having a problem in the hospital, I'm sick, whatever, just so we could move forward. We also had a check-in process that if we didn't hear from them in a certain amount of time, then we had to, someone would go visit, whoever was responsible for them would go check on them, because we had people in that country that lived there that were responsible for keeping up with them and taking care of them, make sure all their needs were met. So obviously with mission boards, there's folks there that stay there that you're working with, contact people. If your church here needs to have that information, who they are and all that, so that they can check in with them. If they haven't heard from you in a while, your family, you hadn't called them or you had, Skyped with them or whatever, then someone will go physically go check and see, are you okay? And then again, as long as you have all that information, who you need to contact if you have an emergency, that's the best thing you can do, is just knowledge, knowing who's my contact there, who do I reach out to, what's the phone number for the embassy, and things like that, in case of me as a U.S. citizen, I'm in trouble in this country and I need help, because that's the only people that can help you is the embassy at that point, because while you're not on, if you were at the embassy, you're on U.S. territory, but when you're out in their country, you're at their mercy because you're under their laws.
One thing that Brotherhood offers, and you don't have to be a customer of ours, we have a product called Faith Ventures, that for $4 you can buy a travel insurance that will protect you with all that stuff. If you get kidnapped, we also have some kidnapping, ransoming, and that. So faithventures.com, we're going to look at that when you guys travel. It's a cheap travel insurance that has a lot of coverage on there, and that'll even cover you for 365 days.
Guys, we're gonna stop here, and I know you may have some more questions, and I'm gonna ask the guys to stay here for a few minutes. I want to just say thank you. Give a hand to these guys. Appreciate so much for your presence today. Just remember, and the security question, I kind of wanted to answer that about international. I'll be glad to talk with you later. We served for almost 30 years with the IMB. You can ask 5 local missionaries about safety issues, and you're probably going to get 5 different responses, because we're just as people are on the parameter of guns from one side to the next. Safety issues, people tend to be very lax, others tend to be overly secure, and so, but I think that's where you want to start. That's definitely where you want to start. Can you stand with me? Let's all stand. And you know what? How about reaching across the aisle, grabbing a hand?
Please, may I make a closing statement?
Yes, you may.
I promise, 20 seconds. I'd like to add 2 items to your pepper spray point on your list of 8 things. Whistles. Everybody can carry a whistle. Problem in the church, blow a whistle, help people run. And you can also maybe carry an air horn in your purse, like a starter horn. Everybody can carry those things. Good things to do. And my last part of my statement is, please, 8 things before 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Action is what is required here. Don't take this information away from here and sit on it. Don't wait for policy by your deacons. Don't wait for a procedure by your safety committee. And don't wait for permission from the Baptist kitchen ladies. You can just start doing stuff. Thank you.
All right, let's pray. Father God, we thank you so much for this time we've had today to talk about safety issues. Father, we've learned many things. We've been challenged. We probably have still a lot of questions. Father, we pray that we would leave here and that we would put into practice the things we've learned, that we would, as we've heard again, help our churches to realize that we need to train, that we need to be prepared. We need to do common sense things that many times would alleviate a lot of problems. Father, we live in a dangerous world, but we have a gracious, loving God. So Father, we know that you love us. We ask that you would help us to love others and receive them and welcome them into our churches. But also, Father, that we would be smart, that we would be wise, and that we would do the best job that we can to protect everyone who comes through the doors. In Jesus' name, Father, we pray. Amen.